Morning. It's a pleasure to be here. As noted, my presentation is really going to focus on the importance of collaboration and cultural understanding as we're developing therapies within both Japan and US. And so over the past few years, we've actually seen tremendous advances in treatment for patients with life-threatening illnesses, particularly cancers, as a result of the approval of innovative therapies. And developing innovative therapies is very complex. And then having a company that has drug development presence both in the US as well as Japan adds some unique challenges. And so what I'd like to do today is just take a few minutes to talk about those unique challenges, how those challenges impact the pharmaceutical industry in general, and then talk about how those challenges impact our ability to get these innovative therapies to patients who actually may need them. And so I have a question for you. How many of you are familiar with the term drug lag? If I could see hands. Okay, there's a couple. Drug lag is really a challenge that not only the pharmaceutical industry faces, but also the regulators in Japan. And what drug lag is really when a therapy is available in one country, but not another country. So another way to think about that is there's an innovation gap between one market and the next market. And there's reasons for drug lag, one being different regulatory requirements. For example, pharmacokinetic data, which is basically tests that show how a drug flows through the body. Safety data and efficacy data are required in Japanese patients in order for us to submit a new drug application in Japan. Another reason is differences in timeline review of the regulators of those applications. So the Pharmaceutical and Medicinal Device Agency, short the PMDA, is the review board for new product applications in Japan. And historically, the PMDA has taken 1 year longer than the US FDA to review those product submissions. And then lastly, companies have limited resources, and they really have critical decisions when it comes to investing. And I'm sure you're familiar with that with your own companies. So as a result of drug lag, the focus has really been on getting approval in the US first, and then moving into Japan in the future. And so what that strategy has done from a clinical development perspective is really resulted in development plans that are a little ineffective, that are actually quite costly, and take a long time to develop. I've been working in drug development now 22 years, and I joined Astellas, which is a Tokyo-based pharmaceutical company with development headquarters just outside Chicago, Illinois, 13 years ago now. When I arrived at Astellas, I came from a US-based pharmaceutical company, so pretty quickly on, I saw some cultural differences between the companies. For example, when we're seeking advice from key opinion leaders, which is oftentimes what we do when we're developing strategies, in Japan, this is a very formal process. When you're going to meet an expert at an academic institution or hospital setting, the expectation from that expert is that the advice rendered will be incorporated into your strategy. And if that advice is not incorporated, then the company must go back and save face with that expert and have a discussion on why that advice was not incorporated. In comparison, in the US, when we go to seek advice from our expert advisors, there's really no expectation from that advisor that that advice would be incorporated into that strategy. It's truly just advice for consideration. And if we don't incorporate it, we're not expected to go back to that investigator and have that discussion. The other area that became evident was decision making. So within the US, we'd be walking into key strategy meetings and really not having a good handle on the outcome of that meeting until we walked into the room, had that robust discussion, and a decision was rendered. In Japan, going into key governance meetings, there's a lot of work done up front. We feel pretty comfortable when we're going to walk into that room that we know what that outcome of the decision will be. And this is when I became familiar with the term called EMA Washashi. And I suspect that some of you may be familiar with that. But for those of you who are not familiar with that, EMA Washashi is a Japanese term which literally means going around the roots. So what it refers to is you're preparing a tree for transplantation. And what you want to do then is bring the soil from the new location that you're going to transplant the tree to the roots so they can become familiar with that soil before you move that tree. And so translating that into today's terminology, I would say it means progress should be made in a very sensible, methodical fashion. So critical decisions or major changes in decisions should only be made with the key stakeholder input, reviewing of all the information with that key stakeholder, obtaining that feedback, and then earning that support before the meeting. So one way to apply EMA Washashi would be at a project team meeting where you have different functional representatives, and those functional representatives are then responsible for working with their functional heads to review that key information that will be discussed at that meeting, to obtain that feedback early on and bring it to the project team before that meeting. The project team can then therefore consider incorporating that information, or if they decide not to, they go back to that functional head to let them know why. But the main responsibility is that that functional lead must earn that functional head support before walking into that decision meeting. And so what that allows for is really more streamlined decision processes in that boardroom. It also allows for teams to be really focused and productive because they already have a handle for the outcome of that decision. The ability of the US and Japan to continue to collaborate and enhance and strengthen our alignment is really critical to the sustained success for our patients. Such approaches have been used already in tackling some of the challenges with drug lag. So drug lag has been significantly reduced. The MHRA hired additional medical reviewers and cut that review time in half between the years 2008 and 2012. In addition, there's now more expedited approval processes available for critical therapies for life-threatening illnesses that meet very specific criteria and can earn Sakigake designation. Sakigake designation was something that was implemented in Japan in 2015. And what that allows for is the pharmaceutical companies and the regulators to have more frequent interactions during the development of these key compounds in order to streamline the review and approval process. This is actually very similar to something we have here in the United States called accelerated approval opportunity, where it's innovative therapies for life-threatening illnesses that meet very specific criteria. They can apply for accelerated approval, and that was implemented in the US in 1992. And then lastly, companies like Astellas are now building Japan into our phase 3 trials. What a phase 3 trial is, it's one of the last trials that a company conducts before gathering all that data to submit to the regulators for approval. And so by building Japan into that phase 3 trial, we're able to now provide the regulator that data earlier than in the past. And so by doing that, we actually have opportunities for more simultaneous submissions versus that staggered approach of the past. So in addition to continuing to foster that collaboration between Japan and US, I believe we also need to bridge the cultural gaps. And a couple ways to do that are to develop internal guidance documents for teams who are working in the respective regions, not only to help them understand the regulatory requirements, but help them understand some of the cultural aspects of working in those regions. In addition, offering exchange programs between Japan and the US so that teammates can literally sit side by side and learn from each other, and then take those learning opportunities back to the broader organization. And then lastly, encouraging socializing outside the office setting. It's a great way for folks to learn about different cultures. I had an opportunity to do that when I was in Tokyo for St. Patrick's Day one year. Being from Chicago and being Irish, St. Patrick's Day is, something that we certainly do celebrate. And so I learned that my colleagues in Japan weren't really familiar with St. Patrick's Day. So I decided to bring that with me. We had a fun night celebrating St. Patrick's Day one evening. So it was a terrific way for us to bond. And although these may seem like small incremental steps, collectively they really do make a big difference in our ability to collaborate and continue to move our programs forward. And so in conclusion, drug development is very complicated. Science is really hard and regulatory hurdles are very high. However, we have made significant progress from a regulatory perspective, which has then resulted in companies more proactively collaborating on development efforts between the US and Japan. However, I do believe there still remains opportunities for us to continue our collaboration and improve it through the principles of EMA Washashi. And so before you transplant your next tree, I urge you to take the time to bring the soil from the new location to the roots to familiarize them before you make that move. I suspect that you'll find this investment in time and planning will yield great results in the long run. Thank you very much.